Sensationally silver, because you are.
Hi, I'm Robin Norwood, author of the international bestseller, Women Who Love Too Much. And I'm inviting you to join me in conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age, people who demonstrate that sensationally silver is truly a state of mind. This mindset encompasses well-deserved pride in who and what we are today, rich in years and experience, in strength and hope and wisdom and fortitude and dignity. Come celebrate with us, because we all are truly sensationally silver. Welcome, everybody, to our very first podcast of Sensationally Silver, a State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. And ordinary simply means not a great big celebrity, somebody just like you and me, okay? My first guest is Carrie Spira. She is a grief counselor, and I want to give you a little bit of explanation about how she came to be our first guest. Before we started this podcast, I talked to my sister, who's a couple of years older than I am. And I said, Polly, what would you like to see or hear on this podcast? And the first thing she said was, well, I don't want anything depressing. And then she went right on to say, but I would like to know what to say to someone when they are struggling with grief. She had just been to a memorial service, and she was a little worried that maybe she hadn't said appropriate things or whatever. And I thought, I know somebody who can help us with that. So that's Carrie. And Carrie is, let me get this right. She's an advanced grief recovery method specialist. Carrie, what does that mean?
So what that means is that I am certified through the Grief Recovery Institute, and my title is Advanced Grief Recovery Method Specialist. I help people get through the pain caused by grief and loss. And the advanced part of it means that I can help people in person, I can help people over Zoom, any of those different ways. I can do one-on-one with someone, or I can also do groups with someone and other people as well.
And Carrie, how did you choose to do this? How did you come to this work?
It's interesting story, Robin. I was in retail for so long and came to a point one day and said, enough, I'm not spending time with my family. I'm always working holidays. And so I was looking for something else to do. So I went into coaching, was doing that for a few years and didn't have a specific niche. And I wanted to find something that really was passionate for me. And I was talking to my sister. She and I had been talking about it, and she said, I found this seminar for coaches. Why don't we go and maybe we can, figure something out? I thought, great. So I went. She wasn't able to go in that moment. She went another time, had a private session with a coach. We were just chit-chatting about our lives, who I was, that sort of thing. And I had told her that 3 parents of our family friends, kids, were that had died recently, 3 parents. And that really resonated with me. And I was just feeling so upset by that. And we were chatting about it. And I also said, oh, fun fact, when I grew up, my parents owned a funeral home. So I lived in a funeral home growing up. And she looked at me and she said, well, there you go, grief. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Sometimes you can't see something because it's too close to you. It takes someone else to point it out. Yeah. And that's how I started that journey.
All right. So tell me what grief counseling offers a person.
So a lot of times people feel, and what we've been told and just, time after time, is that you just get through it. You get over it. Time heals all wounds, that sort of thing. And it's just not true. A lot of times people are suffering from grief and they don't realize what's actually going on in their life is due to grief. And so we haven't been given the proper tools to work through it. That's where I come in. I help you with proper tools to recover from the pain that is in your life because of grief. And it could be grief from a death, which is what we all think of, or it could be grief from any number of different things. There's over 40 different things that can cause grief and loss in your life. And it manifests in different ways that we don't even realize is going on with us. So I help you see that and get through that so that you can find the beauty and the joy again in your life.
What are some of the surprises in terms of grief? Things that people might not say to themselves, oh, of course, this is grief.
That is a great question because I actually talk about that, some things that surprise you. So one of the things that I learned in my training was that you can have these little accidents, so to speak. You might be walking into your living room and you hit the coffee table. Then it happens again the next day and the next day. And you're thinking, what's going on? This coffee table hasn't moved. I keep hitting it though. This actually happened to me. I was walking through my bedroom into my bathroom and I would hit my arm on the doorway. And it was happening over and over again. It wasn't until I went through the training that I realized it was from grief. My mother had died maybe a few months prior to when that started happening. And those little accidents are just one of the symptoms of your grieving. It's just one of those things, you're distracted and you just bump into things, or you drop things, or you become klutzy, or it might even be a bigger thing. Maybe you're riding a bike to work out and you hit something, like you hit the curb accidentally. You're not really noticing things. Those are the little accidents. It could be bigger as well. It could be like a regular car accident too. Your mind is so distracted from the grief and you don't even realize it. And it manifests itself in that way. So that's one of the biggest surprises from grief. Another one that a lot of people don't realize is that we try to put our energy somewhere else. And it could be working. You know, you've heard of the term workaholic. It could be shopping therapy, retail therapy, those sorts of things. Or maybe you start eating more, or maybe you start eating less. Any of those things are a way to sort of release the energy from the grief, and you don't realize necessarily that it's the grief causing you to go down that route.
Are there things that cause grief in us that we wouldn't identify necessarily as a source of grief? So we don't even have a clue that that's what's going on.
Absolutely. You know, most people think of death, sometimes divorce as grief, and those are the big things. Yes, of course. It could be as simple as you move. Maybe you are downsizing. I did, you know, got to a certain point, downsized, went to a smaller home. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're expanding in your career and things like that. So you're buying a bigger home, or your family is growing. Those things can also cause grief. You're losing your beautiful home that you had before, whether it was a smaller one or larger one. You're losing your friends, your neighbors, maybe your favorite coffee shop, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to necessarily be a large move or a far away move. It could be close, but that familiarity is gone. So that's a bit of a grieving process as well. Even if it's in a good way, you can still have that grief because of that. Some other ways might be financial loss or even a health diagnosis. You know, I'm getting to the age, as most of us are, where the health isn't the same, even if it's just little things. Maybe there's something that happens that is a little bit bigger. Someone is diagnosed with diabetes or you know, arthritis, any of those things. It changes what is your normal. And so then that becomes a loss for you, and you grieve your health, or, you know, those sorts of things. So those are other things that can cause grief that you don't even necessarily think of it that way.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a friend of mine, and there's some real alienation between her and her husband and their child, and they are not allowed to see their grandchildren.
Oh,
The grief that they are suffering over that, it's been going on for years. And those little ones are getting older and they're missing all that. And it's really a daily grieving for them. So
yeah.
if you had someone like that coming to you for help,
Mhm.
what would you be telling them or offering as support?
Well, with the Grief Recovery Institute, the founders of the Institute wrote a book, and that's the book that we use to walk through and give the tools. and it is the Grief Recovery Handbook. You can see mine is well worn. I have Post-its on different things that I like to share with people, that sort of thing. And I highlight, underline, star different things in it that resonate for me, and then that I think will resonate for others. Finding yourself something that will help you in any way is what I tell people. The book for me is how it started. I got this book and just it hit me. I loved it. And that's how I joined the group with the grief recovery. So in the book, what we do is we walk through those initial things that we just talked about, the energy relieving behaviors that we have, and then also the different things that can cause grief. And then what we do is we work up a graph of all the losses in your life and put them down on paper so that you see them and can look at them and, bring them back up, so to speak. And at that point, when we do that, we choose one that feels to be the right one, the one that's giving them the most pain. It may not be the one that brought them to me in the first place. It may be something that was, further back that they realize, wow, I never really did anything about that. I've got to work on that first, and then I can work on this most recent one. And there are different tools, within the program that I do that we, go through things. And eventually, what you're doing is saying goodbye to the pain. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's not saying goodbye to the person that may have died or that sort of thing, or even the relationship. If it's a divorce, you're saying goodbye to the pain that's been caused so that you can still look back on the relationship, whatever it is, and be okay with it. Even if it was a painful one, you can still be okay with it and then go forward. And like I said, find the beauty and the joy again in your life, start living again.
Mm-hmm. So if it's a situation such as I described, where there are these young children, they're growing, there's not really an ending to that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, with a death, there is an ending and then the healing commences. But every time there's a holiday, every time there's a birthday, it's all stirred up again.
It is.
How do you deal with that?
That's one of those, like you just said, ongoing kinds of things that I help people with the tools to sort of cope and manage it, and not to get over it yet, because like you said, it's not ended yet. They haven't either reconciled or completely, ended the relationship on their end, especially. So in that case, the tools just help them to manage that pain, to still see the life that they have, and to realize, yes, you're suffering and you're grieving, and you still need to live your life, because at any moment that situation could change.
Okay.
And they could be a part of their lives. So you don't want to end that in any way, emotionally or physically.
Mm-hmm. And best case or worst case scenario, you can wait till they're 18 and they can make those decisions on their own. And because they had a precious relationship with each of those kids.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the worst effects of grief that you've seen where, kind of the desperate situations?
Probably the worst is going to substance, whether it's drugs or alcohol, going down that route, medicating that way, even if it's through your doctor. A lot of people turn there as a way to cope with things. And for some, that may be what they need because the magnitude is so great. Personally, I would prefer to have someone reach out to anyone as a grief resource, even just reading a book like the book I mentioned, or turning to someone like myself that could help walk them through it. But definitely the substance, self-medicating, any of that it's very, very high when it comes to grief. A lot of times also I see that grief can also be misconstrued as depression. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that all depression is grief, but I think sometimes grief is treated as depression. So then it is medicated. and it shouldn't necessarily be. It doesn't have to always be. So, that's one of those fine lines that you just have to figure out the balance.
When I was a therapist, one of the things that I noticed in my practice was that if people were using substances that altered the mind, they could not walk through what they needed to walk through. They could come in and talk in a session, da 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 da, but it didn't stick. It didn't hold. So they didn't make progress. And of course, because I worked in the field of addiction, I tend to be very overly cautious, actually really negative about using substances to mask things, because there is a process that we go through that is natural, and it can be helped, I'm sure, as you're saying, with the right tools, the right support, so that people don't just flounder, but to cover it up. I think sometimes that's a terrible mistake. You stay stuck.
I agree with you completely. You're right. When you are, altered in some way, you do have that inability to deal with it. Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, it's a process and you do have to get through it. Yeah. And if you're just medicating in some way, even if it's, the workaholic end of things or the retail therapy, you're still not addressing it.
Mm-hmm. And like any anesthetic, it's going to wear off, and there's the problem, sitting there waiting.
Exactly. Could be years down the road. Mm-hmm.
So how has doing this work changed your life, Carrie? Because I bet it has.
It definitely has. It definitely has. I, for so long, was just trying to figure out, okay, what's my calling? Where do I go to help people? Because that's me down to my core. I want to help people. I want to be of service. And once I found this journey, it has just been rewarding beyond compare. And I get emotional thinking about it because when I'm helping someone, they're helping me. And when we do the work, I do the work with them. I read the book to the point where they're supposed to read it. I do the exercises as well. So I'm constantly going through that with people. And there are times when I'll start a journey with someone, and like anyone else out there, I have my doubts. I'm like, oh, okay, I want to make sure I can help this person. And might be a bigger one than the last one, or something like that might be going through my mind. And when we start working and I see those, epiphanies that they might have, those breakthroughs, my heart just swells, like the Grinch in the old Christmas story, where the heart grows, 4 times the size. That's just the way I feel every time I help someone and just can see the light coming back in their eyes and in their heart and in their mind, that yes, I can get through this and I can be on the other side of the grief and the loss. And that to me has just been the biggest and best part of what I'm doing. Definitely.
That's just beautiful. Carrying a message of some kind of recovery is such a rewarding way to live. I mean, it's why I started this podcast. It's exactly the same thing. I wanted to talk to people about getting older and having it be something that we can embrace. It's inevitable. If we're still alive, we're going to get older, and it's not always comfortable, but oh, it does have some wonderful rewards. So let's switch a little bit, Carrie, and talk about you as a person of age. Now, tell us your age.
I'm 60.
So Carrie barely makes the minimum. It's like when you needed to turn 21, okay? She's old enough to be part of this podcast because 60 is our cutoff date, or turn on date, I guess I should say.
Okay.
So I
Yes.
want to ask you some questions about being barely a person of age. What's it like for you? What's your experience of this?
Well, I've always embraced my age, no matter what it's been. And so when I turned 60, I had a huge party, invited lots of friends. We had music and dancing and singing, and it was just a blast. It was a celebration. And, don't wait for the end to have that celebration of life. Do it all throughout. That's the way I like to live my life anyway. And it's just been almost liberating, if you will, because I feel at this point in my life, I have allowed myself to really enjoy the different things that are happening for me. I've always wanted to travel. But I always thought, well, I'll do that when I retire, or, like everything else, we kind of put things off. And with what I do, I should be walking the walk of what I talk. And, life's too short not to, is what I always say. So I've started traveling a lot more and just enjoying everything around me and everyone around me. For example, I went on a trip recently where we went through a couple of national parks. And if you've ever been to any of them, these were my first times for all of them. Grand Canyon. If you've ever been there, your jaw drops. It's just spectacular. Everywhere we went, I just felt like a kid in a candy shop, or like the dog saying squirrel. Like, it was like, oh my God, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. I really find myself enjoying the beauty in life. And I just want to keep embracing that and sharing that with people around me as well. Because, like you said, women of age, people of age, sometimes we think, oh, I'm older, I'm going to retire soon. What does that mean? You're going to sit on the couch, watch TV, and, eat yourself to oblivion? No, get out there. And now's the time to start really living. So that's what I'm trying to do.
I love that idea of a party to celebrate turning whatever. That's
Yes.
a great, great idea. I think it's kind of a European tradition. I know it happens in Spain, where when people have a birthday party, they invite their friends and they give the friends the gifts. They celebrate the friends.
That.
Isn't that beautiful? So there's
Yes.
a lot of ways to do this thing. And sometimes I think birthday parties are wasted on the very young. We could really enjoy them.
Yes.
Have your early wishes for your life come true, Carrie?
They definitely have. I have, like I said, always wanted to be of service and help people. And I really feel like that's flourishing now. So that's a huge one right there, as well as just getting out and meeting people and seeing new things, trying new things. I divorced about 8 years ago. And when I did that, my mantra for the year was, don't say no. Now, that doesn't mean you say yes to everything, because that's not a good thing necessarily either. But my first reaction had been, I had gotten so sedentary and kind of dull that my first reaction was always no, or I can't. So I realized that, thank goodness, and I turned that around. And so that's why I said to myself, don't say no, think about it and then figure it out from there. And I've tried to continue with that. And anytime maybe I'm, slipping kind of back into that, I'll think of that again and just, okay, stop yourself, rewire your brain, your thinking. And that's definitely helped me to just sort of vibrate on a higher level. And my light is brighter. It's not dim as it used to be, for
I
sure.
love that. Yeah. Have there been disappointments?
Yes, absolutely. The divorce, like I, just mentioned, was definitely, a big disappointment. But turning that around, I try to look at the good that came of it. I have two beautiful children that I'm completely proud of, and couldn't be a bigger proud mama. We had a great relationship, my ex-husband and I, and we do still. Our divorce was very amicable. So it wasn't a huge disappointment that drew me down too far. And then other things along the way, just different goals that I set for myself, maybe not having reached them at a certain time that I thought I should have. But I've also been trying to let myself realize it's okay. You'll still reach that goal if it's important to you, just maybe not as soon as you thought you would, that sort of thing. So one of my goals is to not fear technology, which it's been one of those things for me, as I'm sure many other people can relate to, but I let it stop me a lot of times. And I have to remember, just take a moment, you'll get through it, just go a little slower or whatever you need to do. Don't let it stop you completely.
Or
So
find a 5-year-old to teach you which buttons to, I swear they're bored knowing how to push the buttons.
yes,
It's definitely a generational thing. It certainly is for me.
yes.
Okay. I just got this question that came to me that goes back to your grief counseling, and I don't want to leave this interview with you without asking it. tell me if you see big differences or even little ones between how men grieve and how women grieve, and how you deal with that in your practice as a grief counselor.
There are big differences, definitely. Men have always been taught to be the stronger one and to really not show emotion for decades. And some men are better at getting over that idea than others. But for the most part, it's kind of a mainstream idea. And so it is a little bit more difficult to get the men to really dig deep and look at it, as well as bringing it up and working through it. So it is a little bit harder working with men most of the time, not always, but definitely most of the time. I do find that with women, because it seems we are a little bit more in touch with emotions and things like that, that for women, the depth of their grief can often be greater than others. And it could be the same situation, but you have to remember that everyone is grieving 100%. It doesn't matter what the grief is caused by. The grief that people feel is strong and it's deep, and you can't discount that, whether it's a man or a woman. And I wanted to touch on something that you had said earlier when we started the podcast, that your sister, I think it was, that went to a memorial. Okay. And she didn't know if she said the right thing. That's one of those things that it's huge, because people don't know what to say or do. That's kind of how we are. And a lot of times people say silly things, but just because they've heard it over and over again. But as a griever, when we hear it, it's like, oh my God, did they really just say that? So it's interesting that your sister had that thought that, am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? The best you can do is just ask someone, are you okay? How are you doing? And listen for their answer. Most people don't. And just let them talk, or not. They'll tell you, I really don't want to talk about it now, but thank you for asking. Or they will go on and they will tell you about it. And most of the time, people that are grieving just want to be heard.
They don't want it fixed. You don't have to take that on, because you can't. You can't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
in the approach to healing called Recovery Incorporated, I think it was in co-counseling, that they talk about tears, crying as ungriefing, getting the grief out of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is stereotypical thinking, but I'm going to assume that men have a harder time allowing themselves to cry, that sometimes it's really seen as a failure if those tears come out and fall. And that's got to be difficult, because if that's the way that the body naturally sheds grief, one of the ways that we heal from that, to keep that down is to keep it in, right?
Yes. And yes, most men have a lot more difficult time with that. Not everyone cries as a release of their grief. So you have to be aware of that. And it's okay. And I tell people when we're going through these different exercises that they go through with me, that you may cry, you may not. Don't feel bad either way. Both of them are natural and normal. So, some people just don't cry, and they release their grief in other ways. So that's why the tools that I give them to work through everything is their release. So the different exercises that we do, we go through the exercise and then we talk about it. And that also can be a release. Just talking about either the relationship or the painful memory, whatever that might be, that can be enough to release it. But yes, the tears are a huge part for a lot of people, and men do have a harder time with that, for sure.
Yeah, that tightening down to try to hold it in. Anyone who's going to do that is going to probably, again, it will take longer, a little bit longer, if that wants to come out and you don't let it, right?
Yes, definitely.
Right.
And sometimes when you're talking with someone, if you've asked them how they're doing, someone starts crying, and again, we feel like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I help him or her? Or you get worried about that. And some people just turn off to that and they just stop, like, oh, I don't want to be with that person. They're always crying. That's what they perceive. Or I don't know what to do to help them. I don't, So then people start to realize that of certain people and they shy away from them, or they just shut down in front of them. And that's where, bottling all that stuff up comes from. Just our inability to figure out what to do, which you don't need to do anything. Just stop and listen.
Just be there for the person and
Yes.
not need them to hurry up and get through it.
Yes, definitely not hurry.
I was speaking to someone yesterday. This is a little bit complicated, but this woman was telling me about a wonderful class she had when she was at community college, and it was taught by a professor from the nearby university. And it was about how our culture and how cultures all over the world deal with their own taboos. And of course, one of the taboos is dying and death. One of them is disability, and one of them is aging. People don't like talking about those things or addressing them. And she said that one of her assignments in that class was to kind of stand on a street corner and interview people who came by about pretty ordinary topics, and they were very willing to talk, and then to subtly move the interview questions toward those taboos. And she said she still could remember standing on that street corner and going through this with people because their entire demeanor would change. They would close down and couldn't get away fast enough. So I'm going to tell another little story about what happened to me very recently. My book, When We Love Too Much, is coming out in a new edition in June. And I went into a local bookstore and I offered to do a book signing. And the man I was speaking to, I could see it on his face. He could not get away fast enough. I imagine he was looking at this old lady and thinking, oh my God, what's she written? And why does she think it's important? And I even started to I said, I'm going to brag about my book a little bit. And I told him how long it had been in continual publication right up till now. And all the languages, I think it's about 35 now that it's in all over the world. He didn't hear any of it. He couldn't get away fast enough. And he said, well, I'm going to go check in the back room. And as I was leaving the bookstore and I was buying my books, he came running up. And all of a sudden, his whole demeanor had changed because he saw it online. He saw what this book was. It was a huge bestseller. And all of a sudden, I was a different person to him. So what I had been, in a way, to kind of parallel that story I was telling about the woman and her class, is I'd been sort of the embodiment of that taboo, and he could not get away fast enough. And then it shifted when he saw his reality, which was on a screen that said, yes, indeed, there is this book and it is, worthwhile and important. We encounter that all the time as people of age.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. That automatic, you become invisible, you become unimportant, and we aren't invisible and we aren't unimportant. We are treasures of experience. I read a thing recently that said years, it isn't about the years, it's about the experience. But you can't have the experience unless you have the years, right? It takes time to grow up. So, all right, everybody, I want to thank you. Oh, I so want to thank you, Carrie, for joining us. And I want to let you all know that Carrie has another life. This is how I met her. I met her at the Lancome counter in Macy's, and she's going to be my guest again and tell us how to make ourselves look our very best, because she is a makeup expert. Right, Carrie?
Yes, I love to play with makeup.
All right.
Robin, thank you so much for having me as a guest. It was my honor to be here with you. And I'm so excited that another edition of your book is coming out. I read it. I love it. I can't wait for the new one to come out in June.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
I'm living bigger and bolder than I ever have.
So you can look forward to that. That will be in the future on this podcast. Thank you, Carrie, so much for joining us and for all the lovely information you gave everyone. And thank you all for being our guests. Come back again soon to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. Bye for now. Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, is sponsored by Sensationally Silver, a complete hair care product line created especially for people with hair like ours, naturally gray and white hair. Sensationally Silver products can be found exclusively at sensationallysilver.com.
Sensationally silver.